This is HOA Karen Patrol. I saved every receipt and every timestamp. This is your last chance to fix it. Gloria jabbed at the curb sign and screamed that the rule changed overnight and it was my job to magically know. I stood there in my driveway holding my keys, trying to process how a parking spot I had used for 6 months suddenly became a violation severe enough to justify a tow truck idling at the end of my block. The driver was already positioning the wheel lift under my sedan, and Gloria Perez, Finance Committee lead for the Maplewood Commons Village Association, stood 3 feet away with her phone aimed at my face, smiling like she had just won the lottery. I work as a financial analyst, which means I track every HOA fee down to the penny. And I had never seen a towing authorization process this fast. Gloria kept repeating that the new parking decal policy went into effect at midnight, that guest vehicles without the proper sticker were subject to immediate removal, and that I should have read the rules before I moved in, sweetheart. The way she said it, slow and patronizing, made my hands clench. My daughter was supposed to arrive in 2 hours for the weekend, part of a custody and visitation routine that had taken months to finalize, and the HOA kept targeting my schedule and guests like clockwork. Every time I had someone over, every time my ex dropped off our daughter, suddenly there was a new violation, a new fine, a new reason Gloria needed to be standing in my driveway with a clipboard and a clear sleeve held out between us. The tow driver asked if I wanted to move the car myself, and Gloria cut in before I could answer. She said the vehicle was already flagged in the system, that the association had a contract with the tow company, and that any attempt to interfere would be considered obstruction. I asked her to show me the notice, the authorization, any documentation at all. She tapped her clipboard and said everything was filed properly, that I had been warned multiple times, and that my failure to comply was my own fault. I had not received a single written notice. Not one. I pulled out my phone and started recording, and Gloria immediately shifted her tone, speaking louder and slower, enunciating every word like she was performing for an audience. "Smile, I am documenting this for the file," she said, angling her phone to get a better shot of my license plate. I asked the tow driver to wait, and he shrugged, saying he would give me 5 minutes, but the fees started now. Gloria stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the coffee on her breath, and told me that the HOA had every right to enforce parking compliance, that the board had voted unanimously to implement stricter guest vehicle protocols, and that my repeated violations had forced their hand. I asked what repeated violations, and she rattled off a list of dates, all of them weekends when my daughter had been staying with me, all of them times when my ex had parked in the guest lot for drop-off. None of those incidents had resulted in fines or notices at the time. But now, retroactively, Gloria was claiming they were part of a pattern. The neighbor across the street, a guy named Rick who had been dealing with his own HOA harassment over lawn height, stood on his porch with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. He had warned me months ago that Gloria used the rules as leverage, not guidance, that she kept a list of homeowners she did not like and found reasons to make their lives difficult. I had not believed him at the time, figured he was exaggerating, but standing there watching the tow truck inch closer to my car, I realized he had been right. This was not about parking. This was about control. I told Gloria I would move the car, pay for a guest decal if that was what she wanted, do whatever it took to resolve this without a tow. She shook her head and said it was too late, that the tow had already been authorized, and that any further discussion would need to happen at the next board meeting. I asked when that was, and she said 3 weeks. 3 weeks. My medical appointment was in 6 days, a specialist consultation I had been waiting months to get. And if the car was stuck in the tow yard with fees jumping every hour, I would miss it. I told her that, kept my voice calm, and she tilted her head and said that sounded like a personal problem. The tow driver hooked the wheel lift and started the hydraulic whine. I asked him directly if he had seen the authorization paperwork, and he said the company got a call from the HOA management office, and that was enough. I asked for the name of the person who called it in, and he glanced at Gloria, who jumped in and said that information was confidential, that homeowners were not entitled to internal communication records, and that I was wasting everyone's time. I kept recording. I kept my hands open and my voice calm, because the real move was still ahead. I had been gathering proof for weeks, HOA records showing selective enforcement and suspicious enforcement fees, and this tow attempt was exactly the kind of overreach I needed to make the case stick. Gloria stepped back and made a show of photographing my car from every angle, narrating into her phone about the violation, the non-compliance, the pattern of disregard for community standards. She used the phrase community standards like a weapon, repeating it every third sentence, and I realized she was building her own file, her own version of events that would paint me as the problem. The tow driver finished securing the car and handed me a slip with the yard address and a fee schedule. $200 to release it today, $50 more for every 24 hours after that, and the yard only accepted cash. Gloria smiled and said I should budget better, that as a financial analyst, I should understand the importance of planning ahead. I asked her one more time to show me the meeting minutes where the board had voted on this new decal policy, and she said the minutes were available on the HOA website, that it was not her job to educate me on basic procedures. I had checked the website that morning. There was nothing. The most recent minutes posted were from 4 months ago, and they made no mention of parking enforcement changes. I told her that, and she waved it off, saying the site was behind on updates, that the vote had definitely happened, and that my ignorance did not excuse non-compliance. Rick walked over, slowly, hands in his pockets, and asked Gloria if the board had sent out any kind of advance notice about the new policy. She turned on him immediately, snapping that this was not his business, that he should focus on his own property before worrying about someone else's. Rick just smiled and said he was asking as a concerned neighbor, that it seemed strange the HOA would implement a major enforcement change without any communication, and that maybe the board should reconsider the rollout. Gloria told him to leave, actually used the word trespass, and Rick laughed, pointing out that we were standing on a public street. The tow truck pulled away with my car, and Gloria handed me a printed violation notice, finally, a single sheet of paper with generic language about unauthorized guest parking, and a reference to Section 12.4 of the community bylaws. I scanned it and saw that the signature line was blank, that the date was handwritten, and that the section reference did not match anything in the version of the bylaws I had on file. I pointed that out, and Gloria said the bylaws had been amended, that the amendment was posted in the clubhouse, and that I should attend more meetings if I wanted to stay informed. I had attended every meeting for the past 4 months. There had been no amendment discussion. I asked for a copy of the amended bylaws, and she said I could request one in writing through the management company. I asked how long that would take, and she shrugged, said it depended on their workload, maybe a week, maybe 2. My car was in the tow yard. My medical appointment was in 6 days. My daughter was arriving in 2 hours, and I had no way to pick her up. I called my ex, explained the situation, and she went silent for a long moment before saying this was exactly the kind of chaos she had been worried about, that maybe we needed to revisit the schedule if I could not maintain a stable environment. I told her it was not my fault, that the HOA was targeting me, and she said that was not her problem, that our daughter deserved consistency. I hung up and turned back to Gloria, who was still standing there, watching me with that same smug smile. I asked her why she was doing this, what the point was, and she said it was nothing personal, that the association had rules, that enforcement was her responsibility, and that homeowners who refused to follow the guidelines created problems for everyone. I asked her to define everyone, and she said the compliant homeowners, the ones who respected the community, the ones who did not treat the HOA like an inconvenience. I asked if that was in the bylaws too, and she said I could look it up. Rick offered to drive me to the tow yard, and I took him up on it. On the way, he told me that Gloria had been running the finance committee for 3 years, that she had a reputation for adding mysterious line items to the budget, that several homeowners had complained about fees that did not match the approved spending plan. He said the board president was afraid of her, that she had dirt on half the members, and that anyone who challenged her ended up with a string of violations until they either shut up or moved out. I asked if anyone had ever filed a complaint with the state, and he said one guy tried, but the complaint got buried in paperwork, and the guy ended up settling with the HOA for a fraction of what he was owed. The tow yard was a gravel lot surrounded by chain-link fence, located in an industrial zone 20 minutes outside Greenville. The guy at the counter told me the fee was $200 cash, that I needed to provide proof of ownership and insurance, and that if I did not claim the car by midnight, the daily storage fee would kick in. I asked if the HOA had provided any documentation authorizing the tow, and he said they did not keep those records on site, that I would need to contact the tow company office during business hours. It was Friday evening. Business hours meant Monday. I asked if I could pay with a card, and he said cash only, no exceptions. I had $60 in my wallet. Rick spotted an ATM across the street and offered to lend me the rest. I told him I would pay him back by Monday, and he said not to worry about it, that this was exactly the kind of situation where neighbors needed to help each other out. We pulled the cash together, paid the fee, and got my car back. The whole process took 90 minutes. By the time I got home, my ex had already picked up our daughter from school and decided to keep her for the weekend, saying she did not feel comfortable with the instability. I tried to explain, tried to tell her this was a temporary issue, but she had already made up her mind. I was going to lose time with my daughter because Gloria Perez wanted to flex her authority over parking decals. I spent the weekend digging through HOA documents, cross-referencing meeting minutes, and building a timeline of every interaction I had had with Gloria. The pattern was obvious. Every violation notice coincided with a weekend when my daughter was scheduled to stay with me. Every fine was issued within 24 hours of my ex dropping her off. The guest parking policy Gloria kept referencing did not exist in any official capacity. The decal requirement had never been voted on, never been communicated, and never been enforced against anyone else in the community. I pulled up the HOA directory and started calling other homeowners, asking if they had received any notice about parking changes. None of them had. Several mentioned that they had guests park in the same spots I used, and none of them had ever been fined or towed. On Monday, I submitted a formal records request to the management company, asking for copies of all meeting minutes from the past year, all amendments to the bylaws, all parking enforcement actions taken in the past 6 months, and all communications between Gloria Perez and the tow company. The management company responded within an hour, saying that some of the requested documents were not subject to disclosure under South Carolina law, that others would require board approval to release, and that I should expect a response within 30 days. 30 days. I did not have 30 days. My medical appointment was in 5 days, and Gloria was already circulating a new batch of violation notices. The neighborhood group chat exploded that week. Someone, I assumed Gloria, posted a message painting me as a menace and a hazard, claiming I had been repeatedly warned about parking violations, that I had ignored multiple notices, and that the board had been forced to escalate enforcement for the safety of the community. The post included photos of my car, cropped to make it look like I was blocking a fire lane, and a paragraph about how non-compliant homeowners drove down property values. Within an hour, a dozen people had commented, most of them agreeing that strict enforcement was necessary, a few asking for more details, and one person, Rick, calling out the post as misleading and asking why the board had not sent any advance communication about policy changes. Gloria responded in the thread, tagging me directly, and said that homeowners who refused to follow the rules should expect consequences, that the association had been more than patient, and that my continued defiance was forcing the board to consider additional measures. She did not specify what those measures were, but the implication was clear. I replied, keeping my tone neutral, and asked her to provide documentation of the warnings she kept referencing. She said that was available through the management company, and that I should stop wasting everyone's time with frivolous requests. 2 days later, Gloria showed up at my house with backup. 3 other board members, all of them looking uncomfortable, standing behind her as she knocked on my door. I opened it, phone already recording, and she handed me another violation notice, this one for a lawn ornament I did not have. I pointed that out, and she said the ornament had been there last week, that I must have removed it after receiving the notice, and that the fine still applied. I asked her to show me a photo, and she said she did not need to provide evidence, that her word as a board member was sufficient. One of the other board members, a younger guy named Derek, shifted his weight and looked away. I asked him directly if he had seen the ornament, and he hesitated, then said he had not personally inspected my property, but trusted Gloria's assessment. Gloria stepped onto my porch, uninvited, and said she needed to conduct a compliance inspection, that the bylaws gave the board the right to enter common areas and perform visual inspections of homes to ensure standards were being met. I told her my porch was not a common area, and she said the definition of common area included any space visible from the street. I asked her to cite the bylaw, and she said it was in the amendment I kept refusing to acknowledge. I told her to get off my property, and she smiled, pulled out her phone, and said she was documenting my refusal to cooperate, that this would be submitted as evidence of a pattern of hostility, and that the board would be discussing further action at the next meeting. I reached out to an attorney the next day, a guy Rick had recommended who specialized in HOA disputes. He listened to my summary, reviewed the documents I had gathered, and said I had a solid case for selective enforcement and harassment, but that litigation would take months and cost thousands. He suggested I try to resolve it through the management company first, that I should document every interaction, and that I should be prepared for Gloria to escalate further before she backed down. He also mentioned that if the HOA was refusing to accept payments and then charging late fees for the refusal, that crossed into potential fraud territory, and that I should keep detailed records of every payment attempt. That night, someone posted a photo in the neighborhood group chat of my car parked in my own driveway, with a caption saying I was still in violation of the guest parking policy despite multiple warnings. The photo was taken from my yard, close enough that whoever took it had been standing on my property. I recognized the angle. It was the same spot Gloria had been standing during her so-called compliance inspection. I replied in the thread, asking who had taken the photo and why they were trespassing, and the message was deleted within minutes. Gloria posted a new message saying that aggressive and threatening language would not be tolerated, that homeowners were expected to communicate respectfully, and that further outbursts would result in additional fines. I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report about the trespassing. The officer who took the call said it was a civil matter, that I would need to pursue it through the courts, and that unless there was evidence of property damage or a direct threat, there was not much the police could do. I asked if someone repeatedly entering my property to take photos and harass me counted as a threat, and he said it depended on the circumstances, that I should consider posting no trespassing signs, and that if it continued, I could apply for a restraining order. I thanked him and hung up, then spent an hour researching restraining order requirements in South Carolina. The medical appointment came and went. I missed it. The tow yard fees had eaten through my emergency fund, and by the time I had scraped together enough to cover the specialist copay, the office had already filled the slot. The next available appointment was in 3 months. I called to explain, to ask if there was any way to move it up, and the scheduler said I could go on the cancellation list, but there were no guarantees. I hung up and sat in my car in the parking lot, trying to keep my breathing steady, trying not to let the frustration boil over into something I would regret. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of HOA chaos and the moments when the rules finally turn against the people who abuse them. Gloria escalated again the following week. I came home from work to find a tow truck in my driveway, wheel lift already under my car, and Gloria standing on the sidewalk with her phone out, filming. The driver said he had received a call about an unauthorized vehicle, that the HOA had flagged it as abandoned, and that he was authorized to remove it immediately. I showed him my registration, proof of ownership, and the fact that I lived at that address, and he paused, looking confused. He said the work order listed the vehicle as unregistered and unattended for more than 72 hours, and that the HOA representative had confirmed those details. I pointed at Gloria and asked if she was the representative. The driver nodded. I asked Gloria how she could claim my car was unregistered when she had seen me driving it 2 days ago, and she said she was reporting what she had observed, that the vehicle appeared to be abandoned, and that the association had a duty to remove hazards. I asked her to define hazard, and she said any vehicle that violated community standards. I asked her to show me the standard my car was violating, and she said it was parked in a fire lane. I was parked in my own driveway, 10 feet from the street, nowhere near any marked fire lane. The driver looked at Gloria, then at me, then back at Gloria. He said he needed to call his supervisor. Gloria cut in and said the authorization was valid, that the driver was obligated to complete the tow, and that any delay would be reported as non-compliance with the contract. The driver ignored her and made the call. After a 2-minute conversation, he disconnected the wheel lift and told me he was canceling the order, that there had been a miscommunication, and that he would not be towing the vehicle. Gloria went ballistic. She started yelling at the driver, saying he was interfering with HOA enforcement, that she would have his company blacklisted, that this was unacceptable. The driver told her to take it up with his supervisor and drove off. Gloria turned to me, face red, breathing hard, and said this was not over, that I had just made things worse for myself, and that the board would be discussing legal action against me for obstructing HOA business. I asked her what legal action, and she said they were considering a lien on my property for unpaid fines, that the total was over $3,000, and that if I did not settle by the end of the month, they would file with the county. I asked for an itemized list of the fines, and she said I could request one through the management company. I went inside and pulled up my payment records. I had paid every legitimate fine on time, every HOA fee, every assessment. The only outstanding items were violations I had disputed, violations that had never been resolved through the official appeal process, violations Gloria had unilaterally decided were valid without board approval. I drafted an email to the management company, attaching proof of payment for every fee, and demanding an audit of the Finance Committee accounts. I copied the entire board, including Gloria. Within an hour, I received a reply from the management company saying that financial audits required a formal homeowner petition, that I would need signatures from at least 20% of the community, and that the process could take up to 90 days. Rick helped me canvass the neighborhood that weekend. We knocked on doors, explained the situation, and asked homeowners to sign a petition requesting a full audit of HOA finances and enforcement records. Most people were sympathetic, a few were indifferent, and one couple slammed the door in our faces after recognizing my name from the group chat. By Sunday evening, we had signatures from 30% of the community, well over the required threshold. I submitted the petition to the management company on Monday morning, and they confirmed receipt, saying the audit would be scheduled for the next available board meeting. Gloria called an emergency board meeting 2 days later, citing urgent business. The agenda was not posted in advance, which violated the bylaws, but the meeting happened anyway. I attended, along with Rick and a dozen other homeowners who had signed the petition. Gloria opened by saying that recent behavior by certain residents had created a hostile environment, that the board had a responsibility to protect the community from disruptive individuals, and that they were considering a special assessment to cover increased enforcement costs. She did not name me directly, but everyone knew who she was talking about. I asked to speak, and Gloria said public comment was not on the agenda. I pointed out that the bylaws required public comment at every meeting, and she said this was an executive session, closed to non-board members. I asked how it could be an executive session if a dozen homeowners were sitting in the room, and she said they were observers, not participants. Rick stood up and asked the board president, a quiet older man named Tom, if that was accurate. Tom looked uncomfortable, glanced at Gloria, and said he would allow one question per homeowner. I asked Gloria to provide documentation of the parking enforcement actions she had taken against me, including the authorization for the tow attempts and the basis for the fines. She said that was proprietary information, that the board did not have to disclose enforcement details to individual homeowners, and that my repeated requests for records were harassment. I asked Tom if that was the board's official position, and he hesitated, then said he would need to consult the bylaws. Gloria cut in and said the bylaws were clear, that enforcement records were internal documents, and that homeowners were not entitled to review them. Rick asked if that applied to financial records too, if homeowners were not entitled to see how their fees were being spent. Gloria said financial records were subject to audit, but that the audit process had specific requirements and that informal requests were not valid. I held up the petition, signed by 30% of the community, and said this was not informal. Gloria said the petition was under review, that the management company would determine its validity, and that until then, the board would continue operating under existing procedures. A homeowner in the back row, a woman named Sandra, who had been dealing with her own issues over fence permits, stood up and asked Gloria why the board had not sent any advance notice about the parking decal policy. Gloria said the policy had been communicated through the newsletter, that it was not the board's responsibility to ensure every homeowner read every update, and that ignorance was not an excuse. Sandra said she had checked the past 6 months of newsletters and found no mention of parking changes. Gloria said the policy had been discussed at a previous meeting, that the minutes were available, and that Sandra could review them herself. I asked which meeting, and Gloria said it was in the minutes from August. I pulled up the August minutes on my phone, the ones posted on the HOA website, and read them aloud. There was no discussion of parking enforcement. Gloria said those were draft minutes, that the final version had not been posted yet, and that I was relying on incomplete information. I asked where the final minutes were, and she said they were with the management company, pending approval. I asked when they would be posted, and she said that was up to the management company. Rick asked Tom if he remembered a vote on parking enforcement in August, and Tom said he did not recall the specifics, that a lot of business had been covered that month. Gloria jumped in and said the vote had been unanimous, that Tom had seconded the motion himself, and that he was simply misremembering. Tom looked at her, then at the rest of the board, and said he would review his notes. Gloria said that would not be necessary, that the minutes would confirm the vote, and that this discussion was a waste of time. The meeting ended without resolution. Gloria announced that the board would be moving forward with the special assessment, that homeowners would receive notice within 30 days, and that anyone who failed to pay would be subject to additional enforcement action. I asked if the assessment had been voted on, and she said it had just now during the executive session. I asked how an executive session vote could be valid when non-board members were present, and she said the observers did not affect the vote's legitimacy. Tom looked like he wanted to say something, but Gloria was already packing up her things and walking out. I spent the next week reaching out to every homeowner who had attended the meeting, asking if they would be willing to go on record about what they had witnessed. Most said yes. A few were hesitant, worried about retaliation, but agreed to provide statements if it came to a formal complaint. I compiled everything into a single document: the timeline of violations, the proof of selective enforcement, the discrepancies in the meeting minutes, the witness statements, and the pattern of harassment tied to my custody schedule. I sent it to the attorney Rick had recommended, and he said it was strong enough to file a complaint with the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs, which had jurisdiction over HOA disputes. The complaint process required a filing fee and a detailed narrative of the violations. I spent 2 days writing it, cross-referencing every claim with supporting documentation, and submitted it online. The confirmation email said the department would review the complaint within 60 days and that I should expect a response by mail. 60 days. I was running out of time, running out of money, and running out of patience. Gloria had already started circulating rumors that I was planning to sue the HOA, that I was trying to destroy the community, and that homeowners should distance themselves from me to avoid being dragged into the conflict. My ex called and said she had heard about the HOA issues, that mutual friends had mentioned seeing posts in the neighborhood group chat, and that she was concerned about our daughter being exposed to this level of chaos. I tried to explain that I was not creating chaos, that I was defending myself against harassment, but she said it did not matter who started it, that our daughter needed stability, and that maybe we should revisit custody arrangements until things settled down. I told her that was exactly what Gloria wanted, that the whole point of the harassment was to disrupt my life, and that giving in would only make it worse. She said she would think about it and hung up. That night, Gloria posted a new message in the group chat, announcing that the board had voted to authorize immediate towing of any vehicle without a valid parking decal. That decals were available for purchase at the management company office, and that enforcement would begin the following Monday. The post included a photo of a stack of decals, bright orange stickers with the HOA name printed in bold letters, and a price list: $25 per decal, $50 for expedited processing, and a $100 replacement fee if the decal was lost or damaged. Several homeowners commented, asking why they had not been notified in advance, and Gloria replied that the policy had been in place for months, that this was simply a reminder, and that compliant homeowners had nothing to worry about. I drove to the management company office the next morning and asked for a decal. The receptionist said they were out of stock, that a new shipment was expected in 2 weeks, and that I could fill out a request form in the meantime. I asked if there was any way to get one sooner, and she said I could try calling Gloria directly, that she had been handling decal distribution for homeowners who needed immediate access. I asked if that was standard procedure, and the receptionist shrugged, saying it was a new policy and she was still learning the details. I did not call Gloria. Instead, I called the attorney and told him about the decal requirement, the out-of-stock situation, and the towing threat. He said it sounded like a setup, that Gloria was creating an impossible compliance standard so she could justify more enforcement action, and that I should document everything and be prepared for another tow attempt. He also said that if Gloria was profiting from decal sales, that could constitute a conflict of interest, and that I should request financial disclosure of how the decal fees were being used. Monday came, and I parked my car in my driveway, no decal, because there were no decals available to purchase. I went to work, came home, and found a violation notice taped to my windshield. The notice said my vehicle was in violation of the parking decal requirement, that I had 24 hours to comply, and that failure to do so would result in immediate towing. I took a photo of the notice, noted the time and date, and called the management company. The receptionist said she would pass the message to the board, that I should expect a response within 3 business days, and that in the meantime, I should make every effort to comply with the policy. I asked how I was supposed to comply with a policy that required purchasing a product that was not available, and she said that was between me and the board. I asked to speak to a manager, and she said the manager was out of the office, that I could leave a message, but that she could not guarantee when it would be returned. I left a message, then sent a follow-up email to the entire board, copying the attorney, and explaining that I had attempted to purchase a decal, that the management company was out of stock, and that any towing action taken before decals were available would be arbitrary and punitive. Gloria replied within an hour, saying that homeowners were expected to plan ahead, that the decal requirement had been communicated months in advance, and that my failure to act promptly was not the HOA's problem. She also said that the board had received multiple complaints about my vehicle, that neighbors were concerned about property values, and that continued non-compliance would force the board to take stronger action. I replied, asking her to provide documentation of the complaints, and she said that was confidential, that the board had a duty to protect homeowners' privacy, and that I should focus on fixing my own behavior instead of questioning the process. The second tow attempt happened the next evening. I was inside making dinner when I heard the diesel engine idling in my driveway. I ran outside and found the same tow driver from before, wheel lift under my car, and Gloria standing on the sidewalk with her phone out. The driver saw me and held up his hands, saying he was just following orders, that the HOA had called in another abandoned vehicle report, and that he was required to respond. I showed him my registration again, pointed out that the car had been moved since the last tow attempt, and asked him how it could possibly be considered abandoned. He looked at Gloria, who said the vehicle was in violation of the parking decal policy, that the HOA had the authority to remove non-compliant vehicles, and that this was the final warning. I asked the driver if he had seen any documentation authorizing the tow, and he said he had a work order from the tow company, that the order referenced an HOA contract, and that he did not have access to the underlying paperwork. I asked him to call his supervisor again, and he sighed, clearly tired of being caught in the middle, and made the call. This time, the supervisor came to the site. He parked his truck across the street, walked over, and asked Gloria to explain the situation. She launched into a speech about non-compliance, repeated violations, and the board's duty to enforce community standards. The supervisor listened, then asked to see the HOA contract that authorized on-demand towing. Gloria said the contract was on file with the management company, that she did not carry copies, and that the supervisor should trust the work order. He said that was not how it worked, that his company required verification of authorization before removing a vehicle from private property, and that without documentation, he could not proceed. Gloria went ballistic. She started yelling about breach of contract, about incompetence, about how the tow company was making it impossible for the HOA to maintain order. The supervisor stayed calm, said he understood her frustration, but that company policy was non-negotiable. He told the driver to disconnect the wheel lift and cancel the order. Gloria screamed that she would have the contract terminated, that the board would find a new tow company, and that this was unacceptable. The supervisor shrugged, said that was her right, and drove off. I stood there in my driveway, watching Gloria pace back and forth on the sidewalk, muttering to herself, and realized this was it. This was the moment she had pushed too far, the moment where her need for control had overridden any sense of judgment. I pulled out my phone and checked the video I had been recording since the tow truck arrived. Clear footage of Gloria claiming the car was abandoned. Clear footage of her threatening the tow company. Clear footage of her admitting there was no documentation. I kept my hands open and my voice calm, because the real move was still ahead. Gloria turned to me and said this was not over, that the board would be discussing my behavior at the next meeting, and that I should expect consequences. I asked what consequences, and she said that was for the board to decide. I asked if she was planning to file a lien, to continue with the special assessment, to keep harassing me until I moved out. She smiled and said I should have read the rules before I moved in, sweetheart. There it was. The same line she had used at the beginning, the same patronizing tone, the same assumption that she could do whatever she wanted without accountability. I told her I had read the rules, that I had documented every violation she had fabricated, and that I had evidence of selective enforcement, harassment, and financial misconduct. She laughed and said evidence did not matter, that the board controlled the process, and that homeowners had no real recourse. I asked if she was sure about that, and she said she had been doing this for 3 years, that she had outlasted a dozen complainers, and that I was no different. I told her we would see, and she walked away, still filming me with her phone, still smiling like she had won. Rick came over an hour later and asked what had happened. I showed him the video, walked him through the timeline, and explained my plan. I was going to compile everything into a single presentation. Every document, every video, every witness statement, and I was going to present it at the next board meeting in front of every homeowner who would show up. Rick said it was risky, that Gloria would try to shut it down, and that the board might refuse to let me speak. I said I was counting on it, that every time she tried to silence me, she would be digging herself deeper, and that the more she escalated, the easier it would be to prove the harassment. The next board meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks out. I spent every evening preparing, organizing the evidence into a clear narrative, and reaching out to homeowners to encourage attendance. Sandra, the woman who had asked about the parking policy, agreed to speak about her own experiences with Gloria. Rick agreed to speak about the towing incidents he had witnessed. 2 other homeowners agreed to provide statements about suspicious line items in the HOA budget and fees that did not match the approved spending plan. By the week of the meeting, I had commitments from 15 homeowners to attend and support the audit petition. Gloria tried to cancel the meeting 3 days before it was scheduled. She sent an email to the board, copied to the management company, saying that recent hostility in the community had created an unsafe environment, that the board could not conduct business under threat, and that the meeting should be postponed until tensions cooled. Tom, the board president, replied saying that the bylaws required a monthly meeting, that canceling without cause would violate those bylaws, and that the meeting would proceed as scheduled. Gloria responded saying she would attend under protest and that she expected the management company to provide security. The management company did not provide security. The meeting happened in the clubhouse, a small room with folding chairs and a single table at the front. By the time I arrived, 30 homeowners were already seated, more than had attended any meeting in the past year. Gloria sat at the front table with the rest of the board, arms crossed, face tight. Tom opened the meeting and started with standard business, approving the previous minutes and reviewing the treasurer's report. When he asked if there was any new business, I raised my hand. Gloria immediately objected, saying that new business required advance notice, that the agenda was set, and that I could not simply show up and demand time. Tom looked at the bylaws, flipped through a few pages, and said that homeowners were allowed to raise issues during the new business segment as long as they were relevant to HOA operations. I said I wanted to discuss the audit petition, the parking enforcement actions, and the pattern of selective enforcement targeting specific homeowners. Gloria said that was multiple issues, that I needed to pick one, and that I was trying to hijack the meeting. Tom asked the room if anyone objected to me speaking, and no one raised a hand. He told me to proceed, and I stood up, connected my laptop to the projector, and started the presentation. First slide, a timeline of every violation notice I had received, with dates, descriptions, and proof that none of the violations were valid. Second slide, a comparison of enforcement actions against me versus enforcement actions against other homeowners, showing that I had been cited for issues that were routinely ignored when other people did them. Third slide, financial records showing mysterious line items in the HOA budget, all of them tied to enforcement costs, all of them approved by Gloria without board vote. Gloria interrupted, saying I was presenting confidential information, that financial records were not subject to public disclosure, and that I was violating homeowner privacy. I pointed out that the records I was showing were from publicly posted budget reports, that I had not accessed any private accounts, and that everything on the screen was information the board had already shared with the community. She said I was misrepresenting the data, that the line items were legitimate expenses, and that my interpretation was biased. I moved to the next slide, video footage from the first tow attempt, showing Gloria claiming my car was abandoned and threatening the tow company when they refused to proceed without documentation. The room went silent. I played the full clip, let her voice fill the space, and then paused on a frame where she was pointing at the tow driver and yelling about breach of contract. I asked the room if that looked like professional enforcement or personal harassment. No one answered, but several people glanced at Gloria, who was sitting rigid in her chair, jaw clenched. Next slide. A copy of the parking decal policy Gloria had been enforcing, with a side-by-side comparison to the actual bylaws. The bylaws made no mention of parking decals, no mention of immediate towing, and no mention of the fees Gloria had been collecting. I asked the board when the decal policy had been voted on, and Tom said he did not recall a vote. I asked Derek, the younger board member who had been with Gloria during the compliance inspection, if he remembered a vote. He hesitated, then said he did not think there had been one, that Gloria had presented it as an administrative change. Gloria stood up and said this was a witch hunt, that I was attacking her personally, and that the board should shut down the presentation immediately. Tom asked her to sit down and let me finish. She refused, saying she would not sit here and be slandered, and that she was filing a defamation claim first thing Monday morning. I said I welcomed it. That discovery would give me access to every email, every memo, and every financial record she had been hiding, and that I looked forward to deposing her under oath. She went pale, sat down, and crossed her arms. Final slide, the trump card. I had saved it for last, the piece of evidence I had been holding back, the one thing Gloria did not know I had. A few weeks earlier, during one of her property inspections, I had set up a security camera on my porch, angled to cover my driveway and the street. The camera had captured Gloria approaching my car late at night, alone, with a roll of blue painter tape in her hand. The footage showed her marking my tires with the tape, measuring the position, and taking photos. The next morning, she had filed a complaint claiming my car had not moved in 72 hours, using the tape marks as proof. I played the video. The room erupted. Homeowners started talking over each other, asking how long this had been going on, asking if Gloria had done this to anyone else. Sandra stood up and said Gloria had filed a similar complaint against her, claiming her car had been parked in the same spot for days, and that she had never understood how Gloria could be so certain. Rick said he had seen the blue painter tape on curbs around the neighborhood, always near homes that had been hit with violations, and that he had assumed it was from city maintenance crews. Gloria tried to defend herself, saying the tape was a legitimate enforcement tool, that parking regulations required monitoring vehicle movement, and that she had every right to document non-compliance. I asked her to cite the bylaw that authorized her to mark homeowners' vehicles, to trespass on private property in the middle of the night, and to fabricate violations based on her own surveillance. She did not answer. Tom asked her directly if she had been marking cars without board approval, and she said it was part of her duties as finance committee lead, that enforcement fell under her purview, and that she did not need approval for every operational decision. Tom said that was not accurate, that enforcement actions required board oversight, and that unilateral decisions of this magnitude violated the bylaws. He asked the rest of the board if they had authorized Gloria to implement the tape marking system, and all of them said no. Derek said he had never even heard of it until now. Another board member, an older woman named Helen, said she had assumed the tape was from the city, and that she was disturbed to learn it had been Gloria acting without authorization. I moved to the final piece, the evidence reveal. I emailed the video, the timeline, the financial records, and the witness statements to every homeowner in the directory, hitting send right there in the meeting so Gloria could watch it happen in real time. Within seconds, phones around the room started buzzing. Homeowners pulled out their devices, opened the email, and started scrolling through the attachments. Gloria realized what I had done and started yelling, saying I had no right to distribute private correspondence, that this was defamation, that she would sue me into bankruptcy. I said the email contained only factual information, publicly available records, and video footage I had captured on my own property. I said I was exercising my right as a homeowner to share information with the community, and that if she believed anything in the email was false, she was welcome to point it out. She did not. She sat down, silent, while the room read through the evidence. Tom called for a vote to suspend Gloria from the Finance Committee, pending a full investigation, and the motion passed unanimously. He also called for a vote to authorize an independent audit of HOA finances, and that passed unanimously as well. The meeting ended with Gloria walking out without a word, her face red, her hands shaking. Several homeowners came up to me afterward, thanking me for speaking up, saying they had suspected something was wrong, but had been afraid to challenge the board. Sandra hugged me and said she was going to file her own complaint with the state, that she had been dealing with Gloria's harassment for over a year, and that seeing someone finally stand up had given her the courage to fight back. Rick clapped me on the shoulder and said I had just made an enemy for life, but that it was worth it. The independent audit took 6 weeks. The auditor, a certified public accountant hired by the management company, found multiple discrepancies in the Finance Committee records. Line items for enforcement costs did not match vendor invoices. Decal fees had been collected but not deposited into the HOA account. Towing authorizations had been issued without board approval, and the tow company contract included a kickback clause that paid a percentage of each tow fee directly to the Finance Committee lead. Gloria had been profiting from every tow, every fine, every enforcement action she had ordered. The auditor's report was presented at the next board meeting, and Tom read it aloud in full. Gloria did not attend. The board voted to terminate her position, to refer the matter to the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs for investigation, and to pursue restitution for homeowners who had been overcharged. The board also voted to revoke the parking decal policy, to require written board approval for all towing actions, and to implement a neutral compliance process that would be overseen by the management company instead of individual board members. I filed a formal complaint with the county sheriff's office, attaching the video evidence of Gloria trespassing and marking my vehicle without authorization. The deputy who reviewed the case said it was unusual, but that the video was clear enough to support charges. He wrote up an incident report, assigned a case number, and said the matter would be forwarded to the magistrate for review. 2 weeks later, I received notice that Gloria had been issued a citation for trespassing, and that a hearing was scheduled at the county courthouse. The hearing was short. Gloria showed up with an attorney who argued that her actions were part of her duties as an HOA board member and that she had immunity for decisions made in good faith. The magistrate asked if the board had authorized her to mark vehicles, and the attorney said no, but that she had believed it was within her authority. The magistrate said belief was not the same as authorization, that trespassing on private property to conduct surveillance was not protected activity, and that the citation would stand. He ordered Gloria to pay a fine and to complete a community education program on property rights. The magistrate also asked if I wanted to pursue a restraining order, given the pattern of harassment documented in my complaint. I said yes. The magistrate issued a temporary restraining order on the spot, barring Gloria from contacting me directly, from entering my property, and from ordering any towing action related to my vehicles. He set a hearing for a permanent order in 30 days and said Gloria would have the opportunity to contest it at that time. I took the restraining order to the next board meeting and handed a copy to Tom. He thanked me, said the board was in the process of implementing new safeguards to prevent similar abuses and that they were committed to rebuilding trust with the community. He also said the board had received multiple complaints about Gloria's behavior toward other homeowners, that those complaints were being investigated, and that the board would take appropriate action based on the findings. The final showdown happened at the city parking office, where Gloria had filed an appeal claiming the towing restrictions imposed by the restraining order violated the HOA's right to enforce parking regulations. The hearing officer, a city employee who handled parking disputes, reviewed the restraining order, reviewed the HOA bylaws, and asked Gloria to explain why the board had not been consulted before she ordered multiple tow attempts. She said the board had given her discretion to handle enforcement, that she had been acting in the community's best interest, and that the restrictions were punishing the HOA for her individual actions. The hearing officer asked if the board had ever voted to delegate towing authority to a single member, and Gloria said no, but that it was implied by her role as finance committee lead. He asked if the bylaws included any language supporting that interpretation, and she admitted they did not. He said that without explicit board authorization, her towing orders were not valid HOA actions, and that the restrictions in the restraining order were appropriate. He denied the appeal and said the restraining order would remain in effect pending the permanent hearing. Gloria tried to argue, saying the city was interfering with private property rights, that the HOA had a contract with the tow company, and that this decision would make it impossible to enforce parking regulations. The hearing officer cut her off and said the city's jurisdiction was limited to parking regulations on public streets, that HOA enforcement on private property was a civil matter, and that she should consult an attorney if she had further questions. He handed her a copy of his decision and said the hearing was over. Outside the parking office, Gloria tried one last time to confront me, stepping into my path as I walked to my car. She said I had ruined everything, that the HOA was falling apart because of me, and that I should be ashamed. I asked her if she was aware that violating a restraining order was a criminal offense, and she stepped back, mouth open, realizing what she had just done. A sheriff's deputy, who had been standing nearby writing a parking citation, looked over and asked if there was a problem. I showed him the restraining order, explained that Gloria had just approached me in violation of the terms, and he asked her to step back and provide identification. The deputy wrote up a report documenting the violation and said it would be forwarded to the magistrate for review. Gloria stood there, silent, while he filled out the paperwork. When he finished, he handed her a copy and told her that any further contact with me would result in immediate arrest. She walked away without another word, and I drove home, hands steady on the wheel, finally able to breathe without the weight of constant harassment pressing down on me. The permanent restraining order hearing happened 3 weeks later. Gloria did not contest it. Her attorney submitted a written statement saying she agreed to the terms and would comply with all restrictions. The magistrate approved the permanent order, which included a provision barring Gloria from participating in any HOA enforcement actions and requiring the board to use a neutral third-party process for all compliance issues. The order also required the HOA to adopt a formal policy prohibiting board members from profiting from enforcement fees or vendor contracts. The state investigation into Gloria's financial misconduct resulted in a settlement. Gloria agreed to pay restitution to homeowners who had been overcharged, to reimburse the HOA for misappropriated funds, and to resign from the board permanently. In exchange, the state agreed not to pursue criminal charges, though the settlement included a stipulation that any future violations would result in immediate prosecution. The total restitution amount was over $15,000, covering decal fees, towing fees, and fabricated fines dating back 2 years. The HOA held a special election to fill Gloria's position on the board, and Sandra ran unopposed. She won, and her first action as Finance Committee lead was to conduct a full review of the HOA's vendor contracts, terminating the tow company agreement, and negotiating a new contract with a company that required written board approval for every tow. She also implemented a transparency policy, requiring all financial records to be posted online within 30 days of each board meeting, and established a homeowner advisory committee to review enforcement actions before they were finalized. My custody arrangement stabilized. My ex saw that the HOA situation had been resolved, that the harassment had stopped, and that I had fought to protect our daughter's routine rather than caving to pressure. She agreed to return to the original schedule, and our daughter started spending weekends with me again. The first weekend back, she asked why there had been so much drama, and I told her the truth in simple terms. Sometimes people use rules to hurt others, and sometimes you have to stand up and say no, even when it is hard. Rick and I became close friends. He helped me install better security cameras, helped me organize a neighborhood watch group to keep an eye on enforcement abuses, and helped me draft a proposal for bylaw amendments that would prevent future board members from wielding unchecked power. The proposals were approved at the next annual meeting, and the community voted to adopt term limits for board positions, mandatory financial audits every 2 years, and a requirement that all enforcement actions be reviewed by a 3-member panel instead of a single individual. I never saw Gloria again after the parking office confrontation. She moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later, selling her house in a quiet transaction that did not involve any farewell or acknowledgement of what had happened. The new owners were a young couple with a toddler, and they asked me about the HOA during our first conversation. I told them the truth. The HOA had been a problem, but the community had fixed it, and now the rules were enforced fairly and transparently. They seemed relieved, and I realized that was the whole point. Rules should protect everyone, not serve as weapons for people who crave control. The statute citation read into the minutes that shuts the threat down became a permanent part of the HOA record, a reminder that selective enforcement and fabricated violations were not just unethical, but illegal. The HOA compliance process is audited and cleaned up, with quarterly reviews and mandatory training for board members on property rights and fair enforcement. Karen is ordered to stop contacting the narrator directly, and the restraining order remains in effect for 5 years, renewable if she ever attempts to re-engage. Karen tries to flex authority, and the policy says she cannot, a moment captured in the meeting minutes and cited in every subsequent enforcement discussion as a cautionary tale. The tire chalk stick snapped and half sits in a drawer in my home office, a physical reminder of the moment I realized Gloria had been fabricating evidence all along. The 2 pieces of blue painter tape, cracked cleanly down the middle, represent the breaking point where her control slipped and the truth came out. I keep it not as a trophy, but as a reminder that documentation matters, that standing up works, and that accountability is possible even in systems designed to resist it. Thanks for watching.